A billionaire was walking confidently when a deaf little girl begging on the street whispered his name. Instantly, his face turned pale as if struck by a ghostly revelation. "How's the weather where you are today? Drop a like and subscribe to our channel for more content." The autumn sun cast long shadows across Meridian Square as 32-year-old Marcus Sterling adjusted his tailored navy suit and checked his platinum watch. Another successful business meeting concluded, another million-dollar deal secured. The tech mogul's empire had grown beyond his wildest dreams, transforming him from a small-town dreamer into one of the youngest billionaires in America. But success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. As he walked toward his black Bentley, something caught his eye near the old fountain that had stood in the square for over a century. A small figure sat hunched on the weathered stone steps, barely visible among the busy afternoon crowd of business people and shoppers, hurrying past with their own concerns. Marcus slowed his pace, his businessman's instincts telling him to keep walking, to maintain the protective distance he'd cultivated between himself and the world's problems. But something deeper made him stop. It was a little girl, no more than 7 years old, with tangled auburn hair that caught the light like spun copper and clothes that had clearly seen better days. Her small denim jacket was too big for her tiny frame, and her sneakers had holes that spoke of long walks on hard pavement. She clutched something precious in her tiny hands, holding it up hopefully to every passerby who ignored her completely, treating her as if she were invisible. Her big green eyes were red and swollen from crying, and dirt smudged her pale cheeks. Despite her obvious distress, there was something dignified about the way she sat, something that spoke of a child who had been forced to grow up too fast, but still maintained an inner strength that was remarkable to witness. "Please, sir," she whispered to a man in a business suit who hurried past without so much as a glance in her direction. "Just $5. My mama needs medicine real bad." Marcus felt his chest tighten with an emotion he'd spent years trying to suppress. The child's voice carried a desperate maturity that no 7-year-old should ever possess, a weight of responsibility that belonged to adults, not children who should be playing in parks and learning their letters. He watched as person after person walked by, some actually stepping around her as if she were merely an obstacle, rather than a human being in desperate need. The little girl looked down at the object in her hands, an ornate silver ring with intricate engravings that caught the afternoon light. Even from a distance, Marcus could see it was old, possibly quite valuable, but clearly the child had no idea of its true worth. She was offering her most precious possession to save someone she loved, and the purity of that sacrifice cut through every cynical barrier Marcus had built around his heart. "Mama's real sick," she continued to plead with the uncaring crowd, her voice growing smaller with each rejection. "The doctors say she needs special medicine or she might." Her voice broke completely, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as the weight of possibilities too terrible for a child to contemplate threatened to overwhelm her. Something fundamental cracked in Marcus's carefully constructed emotional armor. He'd built walls around his feelings for years, focusing solely on business acquisitions and profit margins, telling himself that success was the only thing that mattered. But this child's raw pain cut through every defense he'd carefully constructed, reaching parts of his heart he'd thought were permanently sealed. Without conscious thought, he found himself walking toward her, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached. The little girl looked up as his shadow fell across her small form, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their eyes met. Hers widened with a mixture of desperate hope and learned fear, hope that maybe this stranger would be different, would help instead of ignore, but fear born from too many rejections and too many adults who had looked right through her. "Hello there," Marcus said as gently as he could manage, crouching down to her level despite the fact that his expensive suit would touch the dirty pavement. The cost of dry cleaning seemed utterly insignificant compared to the importance of meeting this child at eye level, of showing her the respect that so many others had denied her. The child blinked in surprise, as if she couldn't quite believe that an adult was actually speaking to her with kindness and genuine interest. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen a person rather than a problem to be avoided? "Emma," she whispered so quietly he had to lean closer to hear her small voice. "Emma Rose." "Emma Rose," Marcus repeated softly, tasting the beautiful name on his tongue. That's a very beautiful name for a very brave little girl. Can you tell me about your mama, sweetheart? Emma's grip tightened on the ring, her knuckles going white with the intensity of her hold on what might be her mother's only hope for survival. She's in the hospital right now. The doctors said she has something real wrong with her heart, and if she doesn't get the special medicine soon, she might go to heaven like my grandma did last year. Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, but Marcus could hear the terror underneath her brave words. Marcus felt a surge of anger rising in his chest, not at this innocent child who was facing an impossible situation, but at a world that could allow something like this to happen, at a healthcare system that would let a mother die while her 7-year-old daughter tried to raise money on the streets. "How much money do you need for the medicine, Emma?" he asked, though he was already prepared to write a check for whatever amount she named. $5,000, she said, and the number was clearly so large that she could barely comprehend it. "I know it's a whole lot of money, but this ring was my grandma's before she died. Mama said it's really old and maybe someone would want to buy it. I don't know how much rings cost, but maybe if I find the right person." She held up the silver band with such hope in her eyes that Marcus felt his throat close with emotion. The ring caught the afternoon light, revealing details that made his blood run cold and his world tilt off its axis. Intricate rose patterns carved around the band with incredible skill and artistry. A delicate filigree design that was unmistakable in its uniqueness. The same exact design he'd seen only once before in his life 8 years ago. His hands began to tremble as memories flooded back with devastating clarity. 8 years ago. The love of his life. The woman who had owned his heart completely. The ring he'd chosen so carefully, spending weeks finding exactly the right piece for the proposal that never happened. "Sarah, where did you get this ring?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice steady even as his entire world shifted beneath him. Emma looked confused and slightly frightened by the sudden intensity in his voice, the way his entire demeanor had changed from gentle kindness to something much more urgent. "It was my mama's," she said carefully. She said her mama gave it to her before Grandma died. Mama always wears it, but yesterday she took it off and told me to try to sell it for the medicine money. She cried when she gave it to me." The world spun around Marcus as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. Sarah, the woman he'd loved more than life itself. The woman who'd disappeared from his life 8 years ago after their terrible fight, taking with her the ring he'd given her and breaking his heart so completely he'd never fully recovered. The woman he'd searched for desperately for months, before finally accepting that she was gone forever. "Emma," he said very carefully, working to keep his voice from shaking. "What's your mama's full name?" "Sarah Rose Thompson," Emma answered innocently, unaware that she'd just detonated a bomb in Marcus's carefully ordered world. "But she used to have a different last name before I was born. She showed me some old papers once that said Sarah Sterling on them. I asked her about it, but she just said that was from a long time ago." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. Sarah Sterling, the name she would have taken if they'd married, if their fight hadn't torn them apart, if pride and misunderstanding hadn't destroyed what they'd built together. But more than that, the timing, the mathematics of it all, everything suddenly made horrible, wonderful, terrifying sense. Terrifying. Marcus stared at this beautiful little girl with auburn hair exactly like Sarah's and green eyes that were mirrors of his own. 7 years old. 8 years since Sarah had left his life. The implications crashed over him with the force of revelation, and he felt as if the ground beneath his feet had simply ceased to exist. "Emma," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I need to ask you something very important, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Emma tilted her head to one side, studying this kind stranger who seemed so intensely interested in her family. She'd learned early in her young life to be wary of adults, especially men, but something about this particular man felt fundamentally different from others. There was a warmth in his green eyes that reminded her of something, though she couldn't quite place what. He felt safe somehow in a way that was both comforting and completely unfamiliar. "Do you know when your birthday is, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard he was certain the sound would give him away. "March 15th, Emma said proudly, her chest puffing out slightly with the importance of knowing such a significant piece of information. Mama always makes me a special chocolate cake with pink frosting, even when we don't have much money for groceries. She says I'm her miracle baby, and that March 15th is the most important day in the whole world, because that's when I came to make her life better. Marcus did the math quickly in his head, his business-trained mind automatically calculating dates and timelines, even as his heart threatened to explode from his chest. March 15th would put her conception sometime around mid-June, exactly when he and Sarah had shared their last passionate night together, before the catastrophic fight that had torn their relationship apart forever. Before she had vanished from his life without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a broken heart that had never fully healed. "Emma," he said, his voice carefully controlled despite the emotional earthquake happening inside him. "Has your mama ever talked to you about your daddy?" The little girl's face fell immediately, and Marcus saw a shadow of old pain cross her features. "Mama says he was a good man who loved her very much, but that he didn't want us when he found out about me. She cries sometimes late at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. I can hear her through the thin walls of our apartment. Sometimes she takes out a box of pictures and looks at them, but she always puts them away real fast when I try to see." Marcus felt as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until it stopped beating. Sarah had been pregnant when she left, carrying his child, and she'd never told him. All these years he'd had a daughter, this precious, brave, incredible little girl who was trying to save her mother's life by selling the engagement ring he'd given to the woman he'd never stopped loving, the woman who had apparently believed he wouldn't want their child. The injustice of it, the tragic misunderstanding that had kept them apart, the years they'd all lost. It was almost too much to bear. How different their lives could have been if Sarah had just told him about the pregnancy. How much pain and struggle could have been avoided if pride and hurt hadn't stood in the way of truth. "Emma, listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, his voice thick with barely controlled emotion. "I'm going to help you and your mama. More than just help. I'm going to make absolutely sure she gets the best medical care that money can buy, the kind of treatment that will make her completely better." Emma's eyes widened to the size of saucers, and for the first time since he'd approached her, a genuine smile broke across her face like sunshine after a storm. "Really? You mean it? You're not just saying that to make me feel better? Adults sometimes say things they don't mean." The fact that this 7-year-old already understood that adults could be disappointing and unreliable broke Marcus's heart all over again. "I promise you with everything I have, sweetheart. What hospital is your mama in right now?" "Mercy General Hospital, room 307 on the 3rd floor. The nurses there are real nice to me, and they let me stay past visiting hours sometimes. But they keep saying Mama needs the medicine real soon or—" Emma's voice trailed off again as she contemplated possibilities too frightening for words. Marcus immediately pulled out his phone and speed-dialed his personal assistant, a woman who had learned over the years that when Marcus Sterling called with urgency in his voice, miracles needed to happen immediately. "Jennifer, I need you to contact Mercy General Hospital this instant. Find out everything about a patient named Sarah Rose Thompson in room 307. Whatever treatment she needs, whatever experimental procedures, whatever specialists need to be flown in from anywhere in the world, authorize all of it. Use my personal account. And Jennifer, this is the most important call you'll ever make in your entire career." "But sir," his assistant started, clearly confused by the unprecedented urgency and emotion in his usually controlled voice. "Just do it. Now. Immediately. And call Dr. Harrison. Tell him I need the absolute best cardiac specialist in the entire country at Mercy General within the hour. I don't care if you have to charter a jet from across the country. Money is completely no object. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." He hung up and turned back to Emma, who was staring at him with a mixture of pure amazement and growing disbelief. "Are you like a superhero or something?" she asked in wonder. "Do you have magic powers? Can you really make Mama better just by talking on the phone?" Marcus laughed, and it was the first genuine, joyful laugh he'd experienced in years. "Something like that, sweetheart. Emma, I need to ask you another very important question, and I want you to think really hard before you answer, okay?" She nodded solemnly, her small face serious with concentration. Has your mama ever shown you any pictures of your daddy? Do you remember what he looked like in those photographs she keeps hidden? Emma bit her lower lip, concentrating with the intense focus that only children could muster. He had dark hair just like yours, but maybe a little shorter. And green eyes exactly like mine. Mama always says I got his eyes and her hair color. She said he was real tall and wore fancy suits like you're wearing, and that he was the smartest man she ever knew. She said he could solve any problem and make anything happen if he wanted to. Every single word confirmed what Marcus's heart already knew with absolute certainty. This child, his daughter, had been living in poverty while he amassed billions of dollars. His little girl had been on the streets begging strangers for money to save her mother, while he sat in boardrooms making deals that meant absolutely nothing compared to the family he'd never known he had. The guilt was crushing, but underneath it was a fierce, protective love so powerful it threatened to bring him to his knees right there on the sidewalk. This brave little girl would never want for anything again. Never spend another night worried about her mother's health. Never have to sell precious family heirlooms to pay for medical care. Emma, he said as gently as he could manage, how would you feel about meeting your daddy someday? The little girl's entire face lit up like Christmas morning, New Year's Eve, and the 4th of July all combined into one brilliant moment of pure joy. You know where he is? Really and truly? Mama always said maybe someday we'd find him, but I thought she was just trying to make me feel better about not having a daddy like the other kids at school. Marcus felt tears threatening for the first time in years, hot and urgent behind his eyes. Yes, sweetheart. I know exactly where he is, and I think he's been waiting his whole life to meet you, even though he didn't know you existed. He stood up slowly and held out his hand to her. Come on, Emma Rose. Let's go see your mama right now, and then I'll tell you both a story about a man who made the biggest mistake of his life and never knew he had been given the most precious gift in the entire world. Emma took his hand with complete trust, her small fingers fitting perfectly in his much larger palm, and Marcus felt a surge of protective love so overwhelming it nearly brought him to his knees. This little girl, his daughter, his miracle, his second chance, would never want for anything again. Neither would Sarah, if she would have him back after all the years of pain and separation they'd both endured. As they walked toward his car, Emma looked up at him with those familiar green eyes that were so much like his own. Mister, you never told me your name. Mama always says it's important to know people's names. Marcus smiled, his heart fuller than it had been in 8 long years. My name is Marcus, Emma. Marcus Sterling. The name didn't register with her yet, but it would soon enough. When Sarah saw him walk into that hospital room, when she realized he'd found them, when she learned that the man she'd loved and lost was standing beside their daughter, that would be a conversation that would change all their lives forever. But first, he had a promise to keep to the bravest little girl he'd ever met. The Bentley's handcrafted leather seats had never carried more precious cargo than they did during that drive across the city. Emma sat beside Marcus in the passenger seat, her small hands pressed against the window as she watched the world go by, chattering nervously about everything she saw, while still clutching her grandmother's ring like a lifeline. Marcus could sense the undercurrent of anxiety beneath her excitement, the way her voice got a little higher when she was trying to be brave. Is your mama really, really sick? He asked gently as they stopped at a red light, studying her profile and marveling at how much she looked like Sarah when she was concentrating. Emma's cheerful facade cracked slightly, revealing the terrified little girl underneath the brave exterior she'd been forced to develop. The doctors use real big words I don't understand, like cardiomyopathy and systolic dysfunction. But I heard one of them tell another doctor that Mama's heart is real weak and getting weaker, and if she doesn't get the special medicine soon, she might go to heaven like Grandma did last Christmas. The clinical terms hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd heard of cardiomyopathy, a serious heart condition that could indeed be fatal without proper treatment. The fact that Sarah had been struggling with this alone, unable to afford the care she needed while their daughter tried to raise money on the streets, made him feel sick with guilt and rage at circumstances that should never have been allowed to happen. Emma, I promise you with everything I am that your mama is going to get better, Marcus said with absolute conviction. That's not going to happen to her. I won't let it. How can you know for sure? Emma asked with the brutal, direct honesty that only 7-year-olds possessed. The doctors said they weren't sure if the medicine would work, and they said it costs more money than most people have in their whole lives. Because, Marcus said carefully as he pulled into the hospital parking lot, sometimes when people love each other very much, they find a way back to each other, even when it seems completely impossible. And sometimes miracles happen when you least expect them. As they walked through the sterile hospital corridors, Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with updates from his assistant. Jennifer had worked absolute miracles in the past hour. Dr. Marcus Harrison, the leading cardiac specialist on the East Coast, was already en route from Johns Hopkins. A team of the finest doctors in the country was being assembled. The experimental treatment Sarah needed, treatment that would have been financially impossible for her to afford, was being prepared by a team of specialists who had been flown in specifically for her case. Emma led him confidently through the maze of hallways, clearly familiar with every turn, every elevator, every nursing station. How many times had this brave child made this journey? Marcus wondered with growing heartbreak, worrying about her mother, carrying emotional burdens that no 7-year-old should ever have to bear. Room 307 is right around this corner, Emma said, her pace slowing as they approached their destination. But maybe I should go in first. Sometimes Mama gets real confused and scared when strangers come to visit. She doesn't like surprises much anymore. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard against his ribs that he was certain Emma could hear it echoing in the quiet hallway. In just moments, he would see Sarah again after 8 years of believing she was lost to him forever. The woman he'd loved with every fiber of his being. The mother of his child. The woman who'd carried his baby alone and raised their daughter in poverty because she believed he wouldn't want them. Emma, he said, crouching down to her level one final time before their lives changed forever. Before we go in there, I need to tell you something very important. That man your mama has pictures of, your daddy that you've wondered about your whole life, I think I might know him a lot better than anyone else in the world. Emma's green eyes widened with curiosity and growing understanding. Really? You know him? Is he nice? Do you think he'd really want to meet me if he knew I existed? I think, Marcus said softly, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer contain. He's been waiting his entire life to meet you, even though he never knew he was waiting. And I think when he finds out about you, it's going to be the most wonderful surprise of his whole life. Before Emma could ask what he meant by those mysterious words, the door to room 307 opened, and a nurse in cheerful scrubs stepped out into the hallway. Are you here to see Ms. Thompson? She asked with professional kindness. She's awake right now, but I should warn you that she's quite weak. The last few days have been particularly difficult for her. Mama, Emma called out, her voice filled with joy and relief as she pushed past the nurse into the room. Marcus followed slowly, and the moment he stepped through that doorway, his entire world stopped rotating on its axis. There, lying in the narrow hospital bed surrounded by monitors and IV lines, pale and fragile but still heartbreakingly beautiful, was Sarah. 8 years had changed her in ways that made his heart ache. Worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, an exhaustion in her posture that spoke of years of struggle, a thinness that suggested too many meals skipped to make sure Emma had enough to eat. But she was unmistakably the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had owned his heart completely and still did. Sarah looked up as Emma bounded toward her bed, and despite her obvious weakness, her face lit up with the pure, unconditional love of a mother seeing her child. Baby girl, you're back, did you manage to? Her voice trailed off completely as she saw Marcus standing in the doorway, and the color drained from her already pale face. Her hand went instinctively to her throat, searching for the engagement ring that she usually wore there, but that Emma had been trying to sell. Her eyes went wide with shock, disbelief, and something that might have been terror. Hello, Sarah, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying 8 years of regret, love, and desperate hope. Sarah stared at him as if she were seeing a ghost risen from her deepest memories. Marcus, what are you doing here? How did you find us? I don't understand. Her eyes darted frantically between him and Emma, and Marcus could see the exact moment when the terrible, wonderful possibility occurred to her. Mama, Emma said excitedly, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake happening between the adults. This is Marcus. He's the super nice man who's going to help us get your medicine. And Mama, guess what? He says he knows Daddy. He says he knows where Daddy is. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Marcus with an expression that combined absolute terror with desperate, fragile hope. Marcus, she whispered, her voice breaking, please tell me you didn't figure it out. Please tell me you don't know. She doesn't know yet, Marcus said softly, understanding exactly what Sarah was asking. I wanted to talk to you first, to understand what happened, why you never told me. Sarah's hand shook as she reached for Emma's face, studying with new eyes the features that were so clearly a perfect blend of both parents. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered to their daughter. There's something very important that Mama needs to tell you about your daddy. But before she could say another word, Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway with a team of specialists, his presence commanding immediate attention. Ms. Thompson, I'm Dr. Harrison, your new cardiologist. I understand you've been waiting for treatment, and I have excellent news. We're going to take exceptional care of you, and we're going to start immediately. As the medical team began explaining the treatment plan, the experimental procedure that would save Sarah's life, the surgery that was being funded entirely by Marcus's intervention, Emma looked back and forth between the adults with growing confusion and curiosity. Mama, she said slowly, her voice small and uncertain. Why are you crying if the doctors say you're going to be okay now? Are you scared about the surgery? Sarah looked at Marcus across the room, 8 years of separation, misunderstanding, and carefully guarded secrets hanging between them like a bridge that might either connect them or collapse entirely. In her eyes he saw love that had never died, regret that had eaten at her for years, fear of his reaction to the truth, and gratitude that he had somehow found them when they needed him most. Emma, baby, Sarah said very carefully, her voice trembling with emotion. Sometimes when grown-ups love each other very much, they make terrible mistakes because they're scared or proud or hurt. And sometimes those mistakes create the most wonderful, beautiful miracles, even when the grown-ups don't know it's happening. Emma frowned, trying to understand the complex emotions swirling around her. What kind of mistakes, Mama? And what kind of miracles? Marcus stepped forward, knowing that the moment of complete truth had finally arrived, the moment that would determine not just his future, but the future of this little family he'd just discovered he'd always belonged to. Emma, he said gently, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. Remember when you asked me how I knew your daddy so well? The little girl nodded eagerly, her green eyes, his eyes, wide with curiosity, and the beginning of understanding that would change her world forever. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that the next words he spoke would forever change not just Emma's understanding of the world, but the entire trajectory of all their lives. The hospital room seemed to hold its breath, as even the medical team paused in their preparations, sensing the gravity of the moment unfolding before them. Emma, he said softly, kneeling down so he could look directly into her green eyes that were so achingly familiar. I know your daddy very well because I am your daddy. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Emma blinked once, twice, her young mind struggling to process information that seemed too big, too impossible to be real. She looked from Marcus to her mother, then back again, searching their faces for confirmation of something that felt like the most wonderful dream she'd ever had. You're my daddy? She whispered, her voice so small it was barely audible. My real daddy? The one in Mama's pictures? Yes, sweetheart, Marcus said, his own voice breaking with emotion. I'm your real daddy, and I have loved you from the moment I learned you existed, which was about 2 hours ago when I saw you trying to sell my grandmother's ring to save your mama's life. Emma's eyes went wide as saucers. Your grandmother's ring? But Mama said it was her mama's ring. Sarah finally found her voice, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Baby, it was both. That ring belonged to Marcus's grandmother first. He gave it to me 8 years ago when he asked me to marry him. I've worn it every day since then, even after I left. The full magnitude of the situation began to dawn on Emma's 7-year-old mind. So you and Daddy used to love each other, and then I happened, and that's why Mama has his ring. We loved each other very much, Sarah said carefully, reaching for Emma's hand. More than anything in the world. But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're scared or hurt, and I made a very big mistake. When I found out I was going to have you, I was afraid to tell your daddy because we had been fighting, and I thought maybe he wouldn't want us. Marcus moved closer to the bed, his heart breaking at the pain in Sarah's voice. But I would have wanted you both more than anything in the universe. Emma, your mama, and I had a terrible fight 8 years ago, and she left before I could tell her how sorry I was. I looked for her everywhere, but I could never find her. I never knew about you because she never got the chance to tell me. Emma's brilliant little mind was working furiously, putting together pieces of a puzzle that had defined her entire short life. So all this time, when I was wishing for a daddy, he was wishing for me too, but we just couldn't find each other? Exactly, Marcus said, reaching out tentatively to touch her hand. I've been incomplete my whole life, missing something I didn't even know I was missing. And it was you, Emma rose. It was you and your mama. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat gently, reminding them of his presence. I'm sorry to interrupt this remarkable reunion, but we really do need to begin Ms. Thompson's treatment immediately. However, I think this emotional breakthrough might actually help with her recovery. Stress and heartbreak can significantly impact cardiac health. Emma suddenly turned to the doctor with the fierce protectiveness of a child who had almost lost everything. You're going to make my mama all better, right? Now that I've found my daddy, I can't lose my mama too. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure your mama is completely healthy, Dr. Harrison assured her with professional confidence. And having your family together will help her heal faster than any medicine we could give her. As the medical team began preparing Sarah for the procedure, Emma climbed carefully onto the hospital bed beside her mother, snuggling close with the careful consideration of a child who understood fragility. Mama, why didn't you tell Daddy about me? Weren't you excited when you found out I was coming? Sarah's arms tightened around her daughter and she looked over Emma's head at Marcus with eyes full of regret. I was terrified, baby girl. Your daddy and I had said some very hurtful things to each other and I was young and scared and proud. I thought maybe he wouldn't want a baby and I couldn't bear the thought of him rejecting us. So I ran away instead of being brave enough to tell him the truth. But that was silly, Mama, Emma said with the straightforward logic of childhood. Daddy seems really nice, and he's super rich, so he could have helped us not be poor. We could have lived in a big house instead of our tiny apartment with the leaky roof. Marcus felt each word like a knife to his heart. His daughter had lived in poverty while he accumulated wealth he didn't even need. She'd worried about her mother dying while he'd worried about stock prices and merger deals. The injustice of it was almost unbearable. Emma, he said seriously, I want you to know that from this moment forward, you and your mama will never have to worry about money again. You'll have the best of everything, the finest schools, beautiful clothes, toys, trips anywhere in the world you want to go. But more importantly, you'll have something I should have given you from the beginning, a daddy who loves you more than all the stars in the sky. Emma considered this with the gravity of someone much older than her 7 years. Will we really be a family now? Like the families on TV with a mama and a daddy who live in the same house and eat dinner together? Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look heavy with years of separation and hurt, but also with possibility. There was so much they needed to discuss. So many wounds that needed healing, so much lost time to make up for. But looking at their daughter's hopeful face, they both knew that whatever personal issues they had to work through, Emma's happiness and security came first. We're going to figure out how to be the best family we can be, Sarah said carefully. It might take some time to work everything out, but yes, sweetheart, we're going to be a real family. Emma's face lit up with pure joy, but then her expression grew worried again. Daddy, you're not going to leave again, are you? Some of the kids at school have daddies who leave and don't come back. Marcus felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. Emma Rose Sterling, I promise you on everything I hold sacred that I will never ever leave you again. Not for business, not for anything. You are the most important thing in my life now, and I have 8 years of being your daddy to make up for. Sterling? Emma repeated, testing the sound of it. Is that going to be my name now too? If you want it to be, Marcus said softly. Would you like that? Emma nodded enthusiastically. Emma Rose Sterling sounds like the name of someone important, like a princess or a doctor or someone who helps people. As the medical team finished their preparations and began wheeling Sarah toward the surgical suite, Emma suddenly looked panicked. Wait, what if something goes wrong? What if Mama doesn't wake up? I just got my daddy back. I can't lose my Mama now. Marcus scooped Emma up in his arms for the first time, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his chest, how right it felt to hold his daughter. Listen to me, Emma. Your Mama is going to be fine. Dr. Harrison is the best doctor in the country, and we've brought in a whole team of specialists just for her. And I'll be right here with you the entire time, waiting for her to wake up so we can start being a family. As Sarah was wheeled past them, she reached out and squeezed Marcus's hand. Thank you, she whispered, for finding us, for saving me, for not hating me for keeping her from you. We'll talk when you wake up, Marcus promised. We have a lot to figure out, but Sarah, I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Emma watched her mother disappear through the surgical doors, then looked up at Marcus with complete trust. Daddy, will you tell me stories about when you and Mama were young and in love? I want to know everything about before I was born. Marcus settled into the waiting room chair with his daughter in his arms, finally holding the child he'd never known he had, preparing to wait for the woman he'd never stopped loving to return to them both. For the first time in 8 years, despite the uncertainty and fear, Marcus felt complete. The family he'd lost was about to be whole again. The surgical waiting room at Mercy General had never felt more like the center of the universe. Marcus sat with Emma curled up in his lap, her small head resting against his chest as he told her stories about her mother's beautiful laugh and the way Sarah used to dance around the kitchen while cooking dinner. Emma listened with rapt attention, storing away every detail about the parents she'd dreamed of having her whole life. Tell me about the first time you saw Mama, Emma requested, her voice sleepy but determined to stay awake until her mother returned. Marcus smiled, stroking Emma's auburn hair that was so much like Sarah's. I was 24 years old working late in my first office, just a tiny room above a coffee shop. Your Mama walked in looking for help with her computer, which had crashed right before an important presentation. She was wearing this yellow dress that made her look like sunshine, and when she smiled at me, I forgot how to speak. Did you think she was pretty? Emma asked with the romantic curiosity of a little girl who loved fairy tales. I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, Marcus said honestly. But more than that, she was kind and funny and smart. When I fixed her computer, she insisted on buying me dinner to say thank you. We talked until the restaurant closed, and I knew that night that I wanted to spend the rest of my life making her laugh. Emma sighed contentedly. That's like a princess story. What happened next? Well, we started dating, and every day with your Mama was better than the last. She made me want to be a better man, to work harder, to dream bigger. We moved in together after 6 months, and I started building my company while she worked as a teacher at an elementary school. She loved children so much, Emma. She would come home every day with stories about her students, and I used to think about what a wonderful mother she would be someday. But then you had the big fight, Emma said, demonstrating that she'd been paying close attention to the earlier conversation. Marcus's expression grew serious. Yes, we had a terrible fight. I was working too much, spending too many hours at the office trying to make my business successful. Your Mama felt like I cared more about money than about her, and I was too proud and stubborn to see that she was right. We said horrible things to each other, things we didn't really mean, but that hurt anyway. What kind of things? Emma asked, though Marcus could tell she was almost afraid to hear the answer. I told her that my work was more important than her feelings, which was the stupidest thing I've ever said in my life. And she told me that she couldn't be with someone who would always put business before love. We were both young and scared and didn't know how to fix our mistakes with words instead of anger. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness of someone much older. But if you loved each other so much, why didn't you just say sorry? Pride, sweetheart. Sometimes adults let their pride get in the way of doing the right thing. I was too proud to admit I was wrong first, and your Mama was too hurt to give me another chance. So she left, and I was too proud to chase after her, thinking she would come back when she was ready. I didn't know she was carrying you, my precious daughter. or I would have moved heaven and earth to find her. Dr. Harrison emerged from the surgical suite at that moment, still in his scrubs, but with a smile on his face that immediately eased the tension that had been building in Marcus's chest for hours. The surgery was a complete success, he announced. Ms. Thompson is going to make a full recovery. The new valve is functioning perfectly, and her heart is already showing improved function. Emma shot up in Marcus's arms like a rocket. She's okay? Really and truly okay? She's not going to die? She's going to be better than okay, Doctor, Harrison assured her. With the proper medication and regular checkups, your mama should live a completely normal, healthy life. She'll be able to run and play with you, travel, do whatever she wants to do. The surgery has given her a brand new start. Marcus felt tears of relief streaming down his face as he hugged Emma tightly. Did you hear that, sweetheart? Mama's going to be perfectly fine. Can we see her now? Emma asked eagerly. She's still sleeping off the anesthesia, but she should wake up in the next hour or two. You can see her as soon as she's awake and alert, Dr. Harrison promised before heading off to check on his other patients. As they settled back into the waiting room chairs, Emma looked up at Marcus with an expression that was far too mature for her 7 years. Daddy, when Mama wakes up, are you going to ask her to marry you again? The question caught Marcus completely off guard. Emma, that's complicated, sweetheart. Your mama and I hurt each other very badly 8 years ago. We both need time to heal and to figure out if we can trust each other again. But you still love her, right? I can tell by the way you look at her. Marcus was continually amazed by his daughter's perceptiveness. Yes, Emma. I never stopped loving your mama, not for a single day. But love isn't always enough to fix everything that's broken between people. We need to learn how to talk to each other again, how to forgive each other for the mistakes we made. Emma considered this with the pragmatic wisdom that seemed to be her defining characteristic. Well, I think you should ask her anyway. I think you... Mama cries sometimes when she looks at your pictures, and she always touches that ring when she's sad. I think she still loves you too, but she's just scared like she was before. Before Marcus could respond to this surprisingly astute analysis, a nurse appeared to tell them that Sarah was awake and asking for them. Emma practically dragged Marcus down the hallway, her excitement infectious despite the seriousness of everything they'd been through. Sarah was propped up in her hospital bed, looking pale but alert, with monitoring equipment beeping reassuringly around her. When she saw Emma burst through the door, her face lit up with the kind of joy that only a mother who had almost lost everything could feel. Mama! Emma launched herself onto the bed with the careful enthusiasm of a child who understood her mother was still fragile. Hello, my miracle baby, Sarah whispered, holding Emma close and breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair. I'm so sorry I scared you, sweetheart. It's okay, Mama. Daddy explained everything, and Dr. Harrison said you're going to be all better now. And guess what? We're going to be a real family now with a mama and a daddy and everything. Sarah looked over Emma's head at Marcus, who had remained respectfully near the door. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, 8 years of separation seemed to melt away. In her gaze, he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, but also the strength she'd developed raising their daughter alone. The wisdom earned through years of struggle he wished she'd never had to endure. Marcus, she said softly, I don't know how to begin to thank you for what you've done, for saving my life, for accepting Emma so completely. You don't need to thank me, Sarah. She's my daughter too, and you're... He paused, uncertain how to finish that sentence. What was Sarah to him now? His ex-girlfriend? The mother of his child? The woman he'd never stopped loving but wasn't sure he could trust again? Daddy's going to ask you to marry him again, Emma announced with the subtlety of a 7-year-old. He still loves you, and I told him you still love him too because you cry when you look at his pictures. Sarah's cheeks flushed pink, and Marcus felt his own face burning with embarrassment. Emma, sweetheart, that's not exactly how these conversations usually go. But Sarah was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Is that true, Marcus? Do you still love me after everything I put you through? After keeping Emma from you for 8 years? Marcus moved closer to the bed, his heart pounding with the weight of the moment. Sarah, I have loved you every single day for 8 years. I've compared every woman I've ever met to you, and none of them ever came close. Losing you was the biggest regret of my life, and finding out about Emma. It's like being given a second chance I never thought I deserved. But how can you forgive me for keeping her from you? How can you trust me again after I made such a terrible decision?" Emma looked back and forth between her parents with growing concern. "You're both being silly again. Daddy said you were young and scared, and Mama, you said you were afraid Daddy wouldn't want us. But now we know he does want us, so we can stop being scared and just be happy." Marcus and Sarah stared at their daughter, amazed by her ability to cut through years of complicated emotions and get straight to the heart of what mattered. She was right, of course. They had wasted enough time on fear and pride and regret. "Emma's right," Marcus said, reaching for Sarah's hand. "We can't change the past, but we can choose our future. Sarah, I want to build a life with you and Emma. I want to wake up every morning and know that my family is safe and happy and with me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I want that too, Marcus. I've wanted it every day for 8 years, but I was too proud to admit it." Emma clapped her hands together with delight. "So we're going to be a real family now? With a big house and family dinners and bedtime stories from both Mama and Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah said, squeezing Marcus's hand as if she were afraid he might disappear if she let go. "We're going to be a real family." Marcus leaned down and kissed Sarah's forehead gently, marveling at how right it felt to touch her again after so many years. "I love you, Sarah Rose Thompson. I love you, and I love our incredible daughter, and I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making up for lost time." "I love you too," Sarah whispered. "Both of you. My whole world." As the three of them sat together in that hospital room, Marcus realized that sometimes the most precious gifts come disguised as the worst disasters. If Emma hadn't gotten sick, if Sarah hadn't needed money for treatment, if his daughter hadn't been brave enough to try selling that ring in the park, they might never have found each other again. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for the Sterling family. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the garden of their new home, a sprawling estate in the hills overlooking the city, with enough bedrooms for Emma to have both a princess room and an art studio, and enough space for Sarah to have the greenhouse she'd always dreamed of. The house was beautiful, but more importantly, it was filled with the sound of Emma's laughter and Sarah's singing, sounds that had been missing from Marcus's life for far too long. Emma was now 8 years old, healthy and happy, and attending the finest private school in the state, where she consistently amazed her teachers with her intelligence and compassion. She had learned to ride horses, was taking piano lessons, and spoke fluent French thanks to her private tutor. But more than all the privileges money could buy, she had what she'd always wanted most: a family that loved her unconditionally. "Daddy! Daddy!" Emma called, racing across the perfectly manicured lawn in her school uniform. "Guess what happened at school today?" Marcus caught her in his arms, spinning her around as she giggled with delight. Even after 6 months, he still couldn't quite believe that this remarkable little girl was his daughter, that he got to be the one she ran to with her news and her problems and her dreams. "Tell me everything, Princess," he said, setting her down, but keeping hold of her hands. "Mrs. Patterson said I'm reading at a high school level and she wants to put me in the advanced program. And Tommy Morrison asked me to be his girlfriend, but I told him I'm too young for boyfriends, and besides, I already have the best man in my life. My daddy." Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and love. "You are absolutely right on both counts. You're far too young for boyfriends, and I'm honored to be your favorite man for as long as you'll have me." "Forever and ever," Emma declared solemnly. "But Daddy, there's something else. Mrs. Patterson wants to meet with you and Mama about something called gifted education. She says I might be what they call exceptionally intelligent, which sounds fancy, but I don't know what it means." "It means you're special, sweetheart, even more special than we already knew you were," Sarah said, emerging from the house with a radiant smile. Her health had improved dramatically since the surgery, and the stress lines around her eyes had faded as financial worry became a thing of the past. Marcus watched his wife approach. They had remarried in a simple ceremony 2 months ago, with Emma as their maid of honor and flower girl combined, and felt the same flutter in his chest that he'd experienced the first time he saw her 8 years earlier. Some things never changed. "How was your day, beautiful?" he asked, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. Wonderful. I had lunch with the board of the Children's Hospital charity. They've asked me to chair their fundraising committee, and I think I'm going to say yes. It feels good to use our resources to help other families who are facing what we went through. Marcus nodded approvingly. In the months since their reunion, both he and Sarah had become passionate about philanthropy, particularly focused on helping families with sick children who couldn't afford proper medical care. They had already funded a new cardiac wing at Mercy General Hospital and established a foundation that provided emergency medical funding for families in crisis. "That's my compassionate wife," Marcus said, kissing the top of Sarah's head, "always wanting to help others." Emma suddenly grew serious, an expression that meant she was about to ask one of her thoughtful questions that often caught the adults off guard. "Daddy, do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't tried to sell Grandma's ring that day? If you hadn't found us?" Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look over their daughter's head. It was a question they'd both wondered about privately but had never discussed aloud. The thought of their near miss, of how close they'd come to remaining separated forever, was almost too painful to contemplate. "I try not to think about that, sweetheart," Marcus said honestly, "because it makes me sad to imagine a world where I never got to know my amazing daughter or got my beautiful wife back. But I think about it sometimes," Emma continued with the philosophical bent that continually amazed her parents. "And I think maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. Maybe if you had found us sooner, I wouldn't appreciate having a daddy as much as I do now. Maybe Mama needed to be strong on her own for a while so she could be the best mama possible. Maybe you needed to be successful so you could help lots of other families like ours." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "When did you become so wise, my miracle baby?" "I've always been wise," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I just didn't have anyone to share my wisdom with before. But now I have my whole family to tell my ideas to." As the sun began to set over their beautiful home, the three of them settled onto the porch swing that Marcus had installed specifically for moments like this. Emma sat between her parents, chattering about her plans for the weekend, her ideas for redecorating her room, and her latest theory about why dogs were superior to cats. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "do you think we'll have more babies? I think I'd like a little brother or sister to teach things to." Marcus and Sarah looked at each other in surprise. They'd been so focused on healing their relationship and adjusting to being a family that they hadn't really discussed expanding it. "Would you like that?" Sarah asked carefully. "Having a sibling?" "I think so," Emma said thoughtfully. "I was lonely for a long time, and I don't want any other little kids to be as lonely as I was. Plus, I'm really good at taking care of people. I took care of Mama when she was sick, and I could take care of a baby too." Marcus felt his heart expand even further if that were possible. This child, their child, had such capacity for love and generosity, despite everything she'd been through. Or perhaps because of it. "We'll see what the future holds," he said diplomatically. "Right now, I'm just grateful for the family we have." "Me too," Emma said, snuggling closer to both her parents. "This is the best family in the whole world. We should write a book about us, about how a little girl selling a ring brought her mama and daddy back together. It could help other families who are separated find each other too." Sarah laughed, the sound like music in the evening air. "You know what, Emma Rose Sterling? I think that's a brilliant idea. Maybe we will write that book someday." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a successful but lonely billionaire, convinced that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Sarah had been a struggling single mother, fighting for her life and her daughter's future. Emma had been a brave little girl carrying burdens far too heavy for her small shoulders. Now they were a family in every sense of the word, not just because they shared DNA or legal documents, but because they had chosen each other, fought for each other, and built something beautiful together from the ashes of old mistakes and regrets. "I love you both more than all the money in the world," Marcus said quietly, speaking the absolute truth. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky," Sarah replied, their old phrase from years ago still perfect. "And I love you both more than everything put together," Emma declared, not to be outdone in expressions of devotion. Marcus Sterling had built a business empire worth billions of dollars. But sitting on that porch swing with his wife and daughter in his arms, he knew he had discovered the only treasure that truly mattered. Love, the kind that endures separation, survives mistakes, and grows stronger through adversity, was worth more than any fortune he could ever accumulate. The little girl who had tried to sell a ring to save her mother's life had ended up saving them all, bringing together a family that had been broken by pride and fear and making them whole again through courage and hope. Sometimes the smallest acts of love create the biggest miracles of all. And as the Sterling family sat together under the stars, Marcus knew that their story was just beginning. There would be more adventures, more challenges, more moments of joy and discovery ahead. But whatever the future held, they would face it together, as a family, complete and unbreakable, bound by love that had proven stronger than time, distance, and every obstacle life could place in their path. The ring that had started their journey 8 years ago now rested safely on Sarah's finger once again, but its true value had never been in the silver or the craftsmanship. Its worth lay in what it represented: promises kept, love renewed, and a family finally, joyfully, and permanently reunited. Emma Rose Sterling had taught them all that the greatest treasures in life couldn't be bought or sold. They could only be found in the hearts of the people who love you, and sometimes, when you're very lucky, they could be rediscovered when you need them most. Their fairy tale was real, and it was just beginning.